Hello and welcome, this is Cheryl. Thank you so much for joining me today. In this video, I'm going to create some one-layer house mouse cards. I'm using this new collection. This one here is called Wishing for Spring. And I absolutely love that House Mouse has a few appropriate sentiments that go with each one of the stamp sets. This one here is called Cheers. I love that little mouse on those grapes. And then this one is called So Sweet. And again, I love that there are several different sentiments to choose from right within that set. I'm going to use some Prismacolor pencils to color in my images, and I'm going to use some Gamsol, which is an odorless mineral spirit, to help blend it out. I'm using that with some paper stumps. I used to use Prismacolor pencils for coloring my images years ago, and I stopped doing it and got rid of my stuff. I'm not really sure why. The cardstock that I'm using is Bristol cardstock. I've used that Bristol cardstock to create my card bases for these one-layer cards. Now I'm going to stamp all of the images at once for all three cards so that that ink can get really dry before I start coloring. I'm using some black StazOn to stamp, and I'm also using my Misti stamping tool to make sure that everything is centered, especially that sentiment, to make sure that that is nice and straight. I like to use the grid lines on my door of my Misti to make sure that it's nice and straight. I'm going to stamp it probably 2 times for most of the images. I know there was one that I think got a good image the first time and I didn't really need to do anything to it, but I want to make sure that I've got all of that detail in there. And I love that with that Misti you can do that. It's really easy to do that. I'm going to clean my stamps off right away. I'm using some StazOn cleaner to do that. This has a dauber top to it, so I can go directly at the stamp and then use a dry cloth to clean everything off. Then I will work on my next stamp and do the same thing. So I am just centering my images on the front of the card. If you want to do layers on your card, you don't need to do this. You can just use a piece of 4 1/4 by 5.5 inch Bristol cardstock and do your stamping that way. I don't do one-layer cards often, so sometimes it's fun to just do that for something a little bit different. And these images fill in most of the front of the card, so they kind of do the work for you. So once I have everything positioned, once again, using that StazOn ink pad, and I'm using a stamp pressure tool in order to apply pressure exactly where I want it to. Some of the areas, especially because of their larger stamp, some of the center areas are a little bit more challenging, and being able to press certain areas down is really quite helpful. And just like the first stamp, I'm also cleaning them off each time before putting them back in the package, making sure those stamps are nice and clean. Now we have the Wishing for Spring. I love this little guy with the little plant there. I think it's absolutely adorable. Really, most house mouse images, I can't say that I found one image that I don't like. They are always absolutely adorable, the house mouse images. So once again, going to position that, make sure that that sentiment is perfectly straight. There's nothing worse than stamping a sentiment and realizing that it was wonky or curved or not straight. So this is the one I believe that I had stamped it once and it was absolutely perfect, didn't need to be stamped again. So once again, going to clean that stamp and then let this dry, and I let mine dry for probably 10-15 minutes before starting to do my coloring. So this particular Prismacolor pencil set has 3 different trays. It's a 72-piece set, and I like to see all of my colors while I'm coloring. I have a little dish here that I'm putting the Gamsol in so that when it comes time to blending them in, I can easily just grab that. This first color I'm using here is 1023 Cloudy Blue, and I'm just doing a light coat over the whole sky area. I'm not making sure to have I want it to fade out to nothing, this color. The next color that I'm using is 923 Pink, and I'm just going over the horizon. I want it to be kind of early morning in the snow with that pretty pink horizon, especially because this is a very simple image. Other than the mouse, the plant, and then the sky, there's really not a lot of color, so I wanted to just add some color to that sky. The next color I have here is 1007. It's Imperial Violet, and I'm just blending that into the pink and a little bit into the blue. I am going to use a little bit darker blue in just a moment to have a blue that will fade out to that cloud blue. This one here is 904 Light Cerulean Blue. And once again, I'm just fading it out into nothing, and I'm using the pressure of the pencil. Sometimes I'm a little bit heavier to get a darker color, and then sometimes I'm really, really light so that it does fade out into that cloud blue. I'm trying to be heavier where it is close to the purple, as well as where it is around the little mouse and the little plant. I want a little bit darker there. For the snow, I'm just doing this shadow part of the snow, and I'm using 20% cool gray. These stamps make it really, really easy to know exactly where the shadows are because you just go where the dots are closest to each other. For the mouse, I'm using 941 light umber, and then for his little nose and hands and feet, I'm using 928 blush pink. So once again, for the mouse, I am doing the light umber over all of his fur, but I'm being a little bit heavier where those strokes for drawing that fur are closer together. It's a really good indication where the shadow is. So it's a great way, if you're not new to coloring, these stamps are great for kind of showing you exactly where the shadow should be. Once I have that all colored in, and I know that I forgot to do the plant, I will go back in and do the plant. I'm using a paper stump and I'm just dipping it into that Gamsol, and then I'm using little strokes to blend that color out. Sometimes I'm doing straight strokes and sometimes I'm doing kind of circular strokes. Really kind of depends on what it is that I'm blending out. I also have some scraps of the Bristol cardstock to my right, and anytime I want to clean the color off my brush, I will dip it into that Gamsol and then scribble it onto that piece of scrap to get the excess color out. Another thing that I have to the side that I haven't used yet is I have some 400 grit sandpaper. If I have some color on that tip and I want to go to a completely different color, sometimes it's hard to make sure that it's completely cleaned off. So by using that sandpaper, I can rub the end of that paper stump and I can clean off all of that color to make sure that I have a clean paper stump to go into the next color with. So now I'm going to blend in the sky, and I'm starting with the horizon first, then I'm working my way out. Now I did the entire horizon for like all of the pink, and then I'm going to go and do all of the purple, blending it into the pink. I want to make sure that I'm keeping the same color on the end of that paper stump and doing all of that color first before moving to my next color. It just makes it a little bit easier, and for me it just makes it so that I can be sure that I'm not contaminating any of the color there. If you like the way it's blended, you can leave it as is. If you don't have as much color as you want, you can add some more color and blend it out again. And sometimes there are times when I do add a little bit of color and blend it out just a little bit more. So it is quite forgiving. Next, I want to color in the little plant. And for that plant, I'm using 911 olive green, 913 spring green, and 989 chartreuse. It's 3 greens within a smaller area. You probably don't need 3. I would say 2 is probably a good amount. I just wanted to make sure that I had some areas that were nice and dark and some that were quite light. Once that's done, I can put that Gamsol back in the container. I wanted to wait in between my different cards. If you're coloring all 3 at once, you don't have to do this step. It's really hard to get it all right back in that container without spilling it on your desk like you saw that I totally did. The one thing that I want to do to complete this card is I want to use some Glossy Accents to give the little mouse a beady little eye, as well as a touch on the nose. And then I'm using some Stickles to make some sparkly snow, basically. And then I need to wait for that to completely dry. And that's why I put my Gamsol away. I didn't want an open container just sitting there. Once it is totally dry, the card is completely done. So this is a very, very simple image to color, and you can tell that there is not a ton of colors to use here. And I created a 1-layer card simply to make that focus on the house mouse image, but you could also add layers and add mattes, and I think that would look gorgeous as well. And I use Prismacolor Premier pencils here. You can use another brand as well, and they will work as well. The Bristol cardstock that I am using is from the 400 series. I tried several different cardstocks, and this is the one that I liked the best for blending on. You could use other ones. I would suggest trying some of the cardstocks that you have and seeing which one you like the blending best on, because they do blend a little bit differently depending on the cardstock that you're using. My next card is using that Cheers stamp set, and I'm going to start by coloring with the grapes. So I'm using 1008 Parma Violet, and 932 violet and 995 mulberry. So that mulberry has the little bit more pinky color to it, and I wanted to have a little bit of variety in those grapes. So I'm making sure that some of them are a little bit more purple, some of them are a little bit more pinky, just adding a little bit of variety to them to make them look a little bit more natural. Now, when I'm doing my coloring, I like to do my coloring first and then use the Gamsol basically all at once to blend the whole image out. There are times though when I do go back in and add a little bit more color. Like for this one, I wasn't intending to color the sky, but once I had the image itself colored, it kind of seemed like it needed that sky colored. It looked like it was missing something, like it was just an image kind of floating there. So in the end, I did go back in and color in that sky because it was needed. For the mouse himself, I'm doing 941 light umber and then that 928 blush pink for, once again, for the nose, for the inside of the ears, the hands, and the little feet. His or her. Every once in a while I'll say his and every once in a while I'll say hers. So I do like to blend between that pink as well as the umber. So I'll be a little bit, like when it comes to the nose, I'll be a little bit heavier towards the tip of the nose, and then I'll blend that color out a little bit lighter. And then when I'm coloring with that umber, I'm a little bit heavier where the strokes for the fur are tighter. That just shows me that that's where it's a little bit heavier. And then I'm a little bit lighter where they're a little bit more spaced out. And when it comes to blending in with the pink, I'll be lighter when I'm blending into that pink. For the grape leaves, I'm using 1005 lime peel and 911 olive green. I'm sharing with you all the colors that I'm using because I know when it comes to card making, sometimes people just see certain colors or color combinations that they love and want to know exactly what that is. But obviously, any of these colors can be changed. If you wanted to do something a different shade, you absolutely could. And these images would be absolutely beautiful, colored with Copic markers or alcohol markers, or even watercolored as well. I didn't want to do that simply because those are my kind of go-tos when coloring. I really love using Copic markers and I love watercoloring, but it's really nice sometimes to have a bit of variety. And I've been thinking about going back to using the pencil colored pencils for a while. So after thinking about it or overthinking about it for a while, I decided to bite the bullet and do that. So the last thing to color in here is the glass that the little mouse is holding, and I'm using 949 silver for that. You could also use a gray as well, but I really like the metallic. So now it's time to go in with that Gamsol as well as that paper stump, and I'll typically start with some of the lighter areas, but I do like to do complete images. So I did first of all the little mouse nose and the ears, just the little pink pieces of them, and then cleaned off that pink off the paper stump, and then went in and did the fur. Next, I will make sure that that paper stump is completely clean, and I'm going to go into the grape leaves, once again making sure to do the lighter colors first. So I'm going to do the lighter green first, and then I'm going to go back in and blend out the darker green into that lighter green. I like to do the lighter green first or the lighter colors first, because sometimes if you do the darker colors first, I find that when you go to the lighter colors, you still have a good amount of color on that paper stump, and sometimes it doesn't necessarily all want to come off. So by doing the light colors first, I can make sure that I don't completely lose those lighter areas when I go in to color in the darker areas, and I can easily blend those darker areas into the lighter areas and make sure that I still see that good contrast between that light and dark. Anytime I feel like I need it, like I'm getting a little bit too much color left on that paper stump and it's hard to clean it off, or if I'm going into a completely opposite color, like here I went from green to purple, I do make sure to bring in that piece of sandpaper and clean off the end or the tip of that paper stump. For the grapes here, I've already said what colors I'm using. I'll start with the pinker colored grapes, blending those out first, and then I go to the more purple colored grapes because I want to, again, make sure that I'm seeing those different tones of purples. I want to make sure that I still see those pinks as well as those purples. I don't want them to all blend together and become one color. Now I'm using 400 grit sandpaper here because it was the first thing that I found in my craft room. You could use something a little bit heavier if you wanted, but it's only necessary to get just the tip of that paper stump off. I don't need anything super heavy, and this this I found worked perfectly. Now, when I was doing my blending, I got a little bit of that purple outside of the grape. So I went in with, also had a set of just some pencil or Prismacolor Premier tools. So it has a sharpener in it. It has a colorless blender that I tried, but I find that I like the Gamsol better, and as well as an eraser. So I tried that eraser. It didn't really erase it, and that was another reason why I found that I needed to color in that sky. I did go in and use that Glossy Accents though, so I wanted to make sure that that was completely dry before I go in to color that sky. And I used the Glossy Accents on the glass, on the mouse's eyes and nose, and then just on a few of the grapes that were whole and were more forward. I wanted to add that little bit of dimension, and I love the look of Glossy Accents on it. It's just an easy way to add detail and add dimension to some of these images, which is why I tend to use them. I tend to use Glossy Accents and I tend to use Stickles mainly for both of those things. So for my sky here, I'm using 904 Light Cerulean Blue and 1023 Cloud Blue. Cloud Blue is the one that is the really light color. So I'm doing the Cerulean Blue more close to the mouse and the grape leaves. Again, just like before, being a little bit heavier right around the edges of that image and then blending it out a little bit lighter. Just like the first image, I want this to kind of blend into nothing. I don't really want it to have edge lines for the edge of the images, especially towards the right side of it as well as towards the bottom part of it. There are going to be edge lines towards the top and the left side just because of the way that image is. So I'm being heavier handed right on this side of the image and then blending it out to nothing. And then once I have the cerulean blue in there, I can go in with that cloudy blue and just kind of blend it out and fade it out a little bit. I totally missed the camera showing the colors on the end of the pencil, which is one of the reasons why I'm telling you the numbers, because it's just much easier than counting on the camera and counting on my filming ability, because sometimes I fail and there's a fail coming up too. So once I have that faded out into nothing, I can use my paper stump, dip it into the Gamsol and start blending. And once again, I'm starting with the lighter color here, blending that lighter cloud blue, and then I will go into the darker color. Now, one of the things that I do when I'm dipping that paper stump into the Gamsol is often I'll blot it onto my scrap piece of Bristol cardstock, mainly to make sure that I don't have too much on the end. It really does absorb right into that paper stump, so it usually doesn't, but I don't want to have a liquid drip at the end and possibly mess up the image. I haven't messed it up yet, but just to be safer than sorry, I do typically blot it onto that cardstock just to make sure that I don't have too much. And sometimes it just takes getting used to exactly how much there is on that stump in order to know whether I need to do that or not. I did the little curl at the bottom in green because I thought it was a vine from the grape leaf, but I will go in a little bit and turn it into that light umber for the mouse, because I realized as I was coloring the sky that I think it's actually the mouse's tail. So if you ever struggle with knowing what part of an image is what, just know that there's others like me out there too. I will regularly color an image and then later on go, I bet you that was supposed to be this or whatnot. It's kind of funny. Sometimes I'll color the same image several times and color it differently depending on where my mind is at the moment. So once I have this completely finished blending that sky out, this card is done because I've already added those glossy accents and those details. So this card is done, but you might have noticed I like to color with that card open. I don't want anything to happen to seep into the next layer. Not totally sure if that would happen or not because I haven't really tested it, but I do like to keep that card open while I am coloring just to ensure that that doesn't happen at all. So I will go back in with my bone folder and make sure that it has a really good crease because it has been open for so long. So the last card here is the one with the So Sweet stamp set on there. And just to clarify, So is spelled S-E-W. Perfect for the theme of this card. So I'm going to start with some of the mice. I'm going to do them in different shades of brown. So this one here is done with 947 dark umber. I'm also using 941 light umber as well as 1056 70% warm gray just to add a little bit of variation. And then once again, bringing in that 928 blush pink for the nose, the hands, the feet, the inside of the ears. I don't want to have all of these mice the exact same color, so I changed it up a little bit. You can even add more browns if you wanted. There's a lot of selection of browns in this set. If you want them all to be a different color, you can do that as well. I chose to do the larger one in the darkest color, and then 2 of the smaller ones in a lighter brown, and then 2 of the smaller ones in the gray color. And that warm gray has a little bit of brown to it, so it's not really a cool gray. It suits the mice. Then I go in with that pink on all of them and all of the pieces that they need to be pink. I do miss a few pieces, so I will go in later on and fix it. Now, this image is a good one to add a bunch of color to because of the yarn, the thread, and the little pile of socks there. It's a great place to add some of those colors. Next, I'm going to go in and color the floor, and I'm using the 904 light cerulean blue for this. I wanted to have just some fun color behind those mice because the mice themselves don't have a lot of color to them. It's nice to be able to add a little bit of color in some of the areas that you can when coloring the backgrounds. So I am going to be darker towards where the floor meets the wall, and I'm also darker right around each one of the mice, as well as around the little pile of socks, the little pile or the ball of yarn. Again, anywhere where there's dots, the dots are closer together and darker, is a good indication of where that shadow is and where those darker areas should be. For the socks, the yarn, and the thread, I chose to do it in 912 apple green. And then I chose to use the silver pencil crayon for the needle. Now, a lot of the color of the needle gets lost as I'm blending out. So once I'm done the card, I go in with a silver gel pen over top of it, and that works even better than that pencil crayon. For the wall, I'm using 1104 Amethyst. I wanted my wall behind the mice to be plain. The image on the front of the stamp set has it patterned, and you can do that. I just kind of found that it distracted from the main image, so I chose to do it plain, but you could easily go in and use a stencil and do a little bit of stenciling on that background to add that pattern to it. Or you could even mask off the mice and stamp some pattern onto that background if you like the pattern on the wall, or you could also freehand it. I'm not a freehanding kind of person when it comes to patterns and drawing. So I chose to do just the amethyst. And once again, blending it out into nothing and then being a little bit darker behind the mice and where that floor or that wall meets the floor. The spool for the thread is 945 Sienna Brown. And then I brought back that amethyst from the wall and colored in some of the socks in that color. I'm using that as well as the pink from the noses to color some as well. I wanted to tie those colors in, as well as I didn't want to introduce too many colors. The only other color that I introduced with those socks was 916 Canary Yellow. I wanted them to be all different colors, but I didn't want to add too many colors and have that be the main focus. I still wanted the whole picture to kind of coordinate well together. So now with everything colored, it's time to go back in with that paper stamping Gamsol and blend everything out. So I'm starting with the floor, blending out from the darkest area toward the lightest area. Now, when I'm doing the images, I will do the lighter area first and then go in with the darker area. When it came to the floor and walls, I don't mind if that darker color gets blended out a little bit. It really depends on which area I'm doing as to whether I'll start with the lighter or the darker. And you could even start with the lighter and then go with the darker. And if you wanted some of that darker color blended out, you can just blend it out even more into the lighter area. And once again, like I've said a couple times here, if after you've blended out, you find that it needs a little bit more color, you can go in and just build that color up a little bit, add a little bit more to it. And I love the fact that with this, it is fairly forgiving that way, as well as the fact that you have a lot of control over how much or how little color you're adding to the cardstock because you can play with the pressure of those pencils. With the floor done, it's time to work on the wall behind. And once again, I typically will start with the darker areas and then blend my way out when it comes to the background areas. This is exactly the same as I did with the sky. I did the darker areas first, or the different colors first. For most of these, I typically like to do the backgrounds and then work on the foregrounds or the images on the front. The only reason I changed up the order on the second card was simply because I hadn't intended to color in the sky, and then after those images were colored, I found that it just really needed that. So once again, it's very forgiving. If you change your mind up, it adapts really, really well. So it's a great way to blend and to color in images, because if you forget something or you change your mind, you can easily do that. This is where I messed up with the recording. I kind of forgot that I got engrossed in my blending and forgot that I was actually recording and that you actually needed to see exactly what I was doing. So I'm a little bit off screen for part of this. Some of the coloring that I'm doing is on screen, but it's just not very centered. We're seeing more of the blank part of the card, and I apologize for that. But once it was done and colored, and that's when I realized what I had done, there was no way to fix it other than coloring in the image again, and I just didn't that day have time to do that. So I'm a little bit off screen, just blending in the different areas of the mice. Just like the first two cards, I started with the nose and the ears and the mouth, the pink pieces, and then I go in and do the brown pieces. And once again, make sure to clean off the paper stump in between changing colors. Now, it's not as necessary to do it between the pink and the brown, but when it came to the browns, I wanted to make sure that I didn't get brown into my gray, so I did make sure to clean off that paper stump in between the different colors of the different mice. And because I have two of the smaller ones in the light brown and two of the smaller ones in the gray, I didn't have to clean off between doing each one of those. Like, I could do both of the lighter brown ones and then clean it off and then do both of the gray ones. So now we go back into frame, and the last part to blend here is the socks and the thread and the yarn. So once again, because we have a bunch of different colors, especially in that pile of socks, I do make sure to clean off that paper stump in between the different colors. Here is when I realized that the silver had completely blended out from my needle, so I just went in with the silver gel pen and just colored over that needle, and it worked perfectly. Next is the Glossy Accents, and once again, I'm just adding it to the eyes and the little nose. These make such great beady eyes, adding that Glossy Accents, and because it's a medium that I've got a really fine tip on mine, it works really well to get into small areas. Now, my Glossy Accents, I've just put it into a bottle. Typically, these bottles I use for alcohol inks, but they work really, really well for those alcohol or for the Glossy Accents. And I just took my label off of the mini bottle and put it onto this bottle, and it works perfectly for me. So this is the finished card here. I absolutely love those images. They're just so sweet. And the little addition of the silver gel pen as well as the Glossy Accents just really add a little bit of extra texture and dimension to them. Then we have our Cheers one with the mouse on the grapes. The variation of color in the grapes is perfect. And again, the Glossy Accents just add that little bit of extra dimension. And then we have our Waiting for Spring one, just an adorable little image. And the snow with the sparkling stickles on top of it are absolutely perfect and just add that perfect bit of extra dimension to it. Thank you so much for joining me today. I really appreciate all the time that you spend with me, and I hope you have a great day and a great holiday season.